focus and decision maker. And here is an example application I created for this analysis. Now for this, user can change the weighting factors, and they then can apply the configuration of the landscape updated in real time. They can also explore the results on field basis or on landscape aggregated basis. Now, though I've shown that the ACT-EcoSoft tool is really useful for thorough analysis for decision making, computational limitation remain the major barrier for large-scale problems. Now, in the last two case studies, high-performance computing systems with hundreds of computing processors were required to create scenarios for the optimization. Such computational burden would make the ACT-EcoSoft impractical in most institutional contexts that require timely analysis for rational decision making. One of the solutions for this is to employ the surrogate-based optimization approaches. These approaches substitute the high-fidelity model in the simulation optimization framework with a cost-effective and simplified model to reduce the simulation time, expertise requirements, and data storage. The main objective of this final case study was to develop a surrogate-based optimization framework for the ACT-EcoSoft. I focus on irrigated corn production system in the whole eastern Colorado, including 35,000 fields of around 299,000 hectares of land. The trade-offs considered farm profit, irrigation water use, and 5 ecosystem services, including food and biomass production, water quality, climate regulation, and soil carbon storage. The problem can be stated as follows: maximizing the landscape sum of silver production, while minimizing the landscape sums of greenhouse gas emission and nitrogen leaching, making sure that every farm in the landscape has maximum profits, the landscape sum of grain production and soil organic carbon are above some empirical level, while keeping the irrigation water use below an empirical level. The empirical values were obtained from the National Agricultural Statistics Service for Colorado. For solvability, this problem was structured as a two-level problem. At farm level, I optimized farm management practices to maximize farm profit, constrained by certain increases in soil organic carbon. The results from farm level optimization was then used to create scenarios for the landscape level optimization. The artificial neural networks was used via a meta-modeling technique to rapidly predict the day-sense farm level soil organic carbon, grain, and silver yields. These metrics will then used to compute the objective function and the constraint function for the farm level problem. And here's a quick information about meta-modeling approach. In a nutshell, meta-modeling is building a cost-effective, simplified model, surrogate model of the detailed process-based models by identifying and then representing the relationship between inputs and outputs of the detailed models. So if the detailed model is the first level abstraction of the reality, then the surrogate model or the meta model is the second level abstract. The meta modeling approach includes generating a data set based on design of experiment, then choosing a model or a machine learning algorithm to represent the data, and then feeding the model through the observed data to create the meta model. The artificial neural networks algorithm was used in this case study. Here's the detailed step taken for the meta modeling. the ACT EcoSoft tool was used to generate the meta modeling dataset. And the configuration, training, and testing of the neural networks was carried out based on a 3-loop sensitivity analysis. The final neural network was selected based on a balance between accuracy, training time, and prediction time. So here's some interesting results. The nested neural networks were built to predict the data and output simultaneously. The final surrogate model exhibited high accuracy with the root mean square errors less than half of a metric ton of carbon per hectare, 1/3 of a metric ton of grain yield, and 1/4 of a metric ton of corn silver yield. The R squares were above 99%. Prediction time, which is the number of seconds taken to conduct 1 million predictions, was compared between the surrogate models and the descent model. And our result shows that the surrogate model was 6.2 million times faster than the descent for our analysis. I think it's really deserved for the fireworks. Yeah? Okay, so here I show the Pareto optimal trade-offs among the corn stover in green, and nitrogen leaching in blue, and greenhouse gas emission in red. Subjects to empirical constraints on grain production, soil organic carbon, and irrigated water use. And you must be similar, or this is similar to the one I showed before. With A is the 3D surface, colored with the landscape sum of profits. B, C, D are the 2D projection, highlighting different Pareto frontier here. With B is a concave Pareto frontier between corn stover and nitrogen leaching. C is the convex Pareto frontier between greenhouse gas emission and nitrogen leaching. And D is the linear Pareto frontier between corn stover and greenhouse gas emissions. The main takeaway here is that Colorado is better off by producing less than 2.2 million ton of biomass per year for irrigated corn. This corresponds to about 7.4 ton of biomass per hectare, or less than 70% of residue removal rate. Here I show an example of optimum configuration of stover removal rate for the landscape at different trade-off level. The change in color here indicate that more stover can be produced with less environmental footprint in the upper part of the stover region. For this slide here, I just want to quickly showcase all the components of the ACT EcoSoft. Although it is not mature enough for a user-friendly application, I would love to get to that stage in the future if funding is available. Here's some final takeaways from my dissertation work. These figures here show a recap of all the tools that I used for this dissertation. First, this work has demonstrated that these decision support tools can be combined and should be combined for more meaningful and operational analysis of agricultural production. Secondly, in order to facilitate the adoption of complex methodology, these tools should be integrated into modeling platforms. For large-scale and timely analysis, this work shows the usefulness of machine learning algorithms. And finally, in order to communicate complex and spatially explicit results to stakeholders and decision makers, web mapping application is the way to go. With this, I would like to thank the generous support of several organizations, including Nguyen University of Agriculture and Forestry in Vietnam, the Fulbright Vietnam Scholarship, the National Science Foundation, NSF, Colorado State University, and Shell Technology Center, Houston. Without them, this work has not been possible. And then I would like to thank my committee for their guidance and support, especially my advisor, Ki Pochtian. Thank you for giving me enough degree of freedom to do what I like to do, and also at the same time keep an eye on me so that I don't go off track. I really owe you a huge professional debt. And I'm grateful to receive help from so many colleagues here as CSU, as Shell, and many other places. And finally, I would like to thank my family for standing by me for all those years as CSU. I know it's been stressful and tough sometimes. With that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you, you all for coming and listening. And I would like to take questions if you have any.
You did excellent on time, so we've got it's like 45 minutes to the dot. So all the workout on the Montfort quad the other day helped out. So we can take plenty of questions. So go ahead and fire away, Ernie.
So you use the DASEN output as your training data for your A&N, right?
Yes.
So you did that for this region of Colorado, but so if you were to try to make this a more generalizable tool, like how generalizable would you have to run DASEN across the whole country? How generalizable would your machine learning algorithm be?
So one of the properties of the neural network is that you cannot extrapolate the data, right? So you build a neural network for a specific problem. If you want to use the neural network for the whole US, then you have to sample the whole US. And then if you want to use it for a range of fertilizer, then you need to sample that in that range of fertilizer. And one of the things that I thought about is like, I can do that for the whole US, but then it will not be practical for this kind of simulation, because the more general the model becomes, the more bulky it will become, right? And so it will require more time to run. In this case, for example, I created a neural network to predict 3 outputs simultaneously. But if I nest that up into just predict the profit, because like I predict yield and I produce organic carbon, and I use the yield to calculate the profit. Right? If I only use one neural network to predict the profit, it will reduce the simulation time by 8%. That makes sense because the whole optimization here took more than a day to run, even with the huge gain in simulation time of the surrogate model. So yeah, there's a trade-off there.
I may have several questions, so
Go ahead.
hopefully it doesn't take a lot of your time. Firstly, spatial, explicit. Usually a problem, optimization problem with spatial integrated into the modeling formulation will make it very hard to solve, especially when you have the interaction capture. Do you integrate the spatial and any interaction of the spatial characteristics into your model or not?
So the spatial characteristic was captured by the use of the DASEN model and GIS. Like in traditional optimization problem, you actually have to create a formula, right? And you normally use a mathematical formulation to represent that.
Yeah, but inside your final optimization model, do you have any interaction? For example, if some carbon in this area is something, and in that area is something, there will be something you capture, like it must be compatible or something like that. That is an interaction. Do you have some kind of interaction
Like
that?
spatial interaction between different fields, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that
Different
was not
location.
captured by the daycent, to be honest.
All right. So actually, in your final optimization, you don't have that spatial capture. Otherwise, you cannot solve the model in one day. It may be a month or years.
Yeah, you have to actually defragment it into, that's the reason why I have to defragment it into 2 levels. I have to solve the thumb level first, so that I obtain the optimal solution in that level, and then I use that optimal solution to solve a larger problem at the landscape scale. Otherwise, if I want to lump that into one simulation run, that would take, I think, maybe years to solve.
Okay. So you just answer my second question,
Okay.
because the second question is about that thing. You have a farm level, you optimize it, you get an optimal solution.
Mm-hmm.
You use that solution as input and do another landscape level optimization. So the final solution is actually not the really objective we want, because you separate the process into 2 different things.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is one of the disadvantage. But I found the answer, because the model can be very large.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have to accept it, and that is usually in operational level. When people want to do something in practice, they have to accept the
Exactly, yeah.
solution. So that is good. The next question is, I see in your study number 2 and number 4,
Mm-hmm.
you use trade-off analysis
Mm-hmm.
and Pareto, right?
Pareto frontier, yeah.
Pareto
Optimal.
So is that true that each of the case you use for comparison is one model and one objective value, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like the first case
Mm-hmm.
is one optimization model. You run it, you have
Yeah.
the result.
Yeah.
The second case, another. The
Yeah.
3, the 4th, and then compare everything to have the best one, right?
Yes.
So-
That's simultaneously consideration of the objectives, right? Not like you can see the first one and then you go and you can see the second objective and the third objective. You need to consider it at the same time. That's multi-objective optimization.
Exactly. But when you consider everything at the same time, how could you get each of the component like that for the comparison? What I mean is, usually, if you run the optimization model and have each of the objectives, something like that, and then compare, it's totally different from the model that consider everything together. So you improve it by adding one more level to the whole modeling system. Each of the thing will be integrated into a new formulation, and then you do something with the model formulation to compare everything within a single run. And when you run it, you can remove the parallel trade-off analysis. But it also increase the complexity of the.
Well, I think so. But,
Tomorrow.
well, we can talk more about this later. But I use different algorithm, and then, for example, the third one I used the weighted sum method, right? So each of the objective was weighted by the importance of it in decision making, and then I only optimize the weighted sum of that. So
Alright.
I turn the multi-objective optimization into single objective just to solve it. And in the second one, I use the absolute method, which a little bit complex to explain, but we probably can talk about this later.
Yeah, thank you, Greg.
Okay, final question from anyone? Oh, John.
I'll ask one kind of open-ended question. So my understanding of your ethanol, your Windsor ethanol plant analysis was that you looked at the landscape around it, considered the size of that facility, and kind of how you would optimize management in order to supply that facility.
Mm-hmm.
So have you, the methods that you presented here, there's a lot of debate within the biofuel community about whether we should be doing biofuels at all or not. And so maybe the question is, should that ethanol plant be there, or should there be 2 ethanol plants there? Should we be, expanding and doing more biofuels? The type of optimization and modeling approaches that you presented here, are they useful for answering that that bigger picture question. If you had more time and more resources, and could kind of take a wider view of the problem, can you start to answer some of these questions more globally? Should we be contracting or expanding the amount of biofuels that we're doing?
So you asked me if I can reformulate my analysis to answer if you should produce biofuel at all, or if you can place more refinery in there.
Yeah.
Well, I think you can answer any question as long as you can formulate the problem. For example, for this, if I consider the greenhouse gas emission from the use and the production of biofuel, that definitely say that, hey, you should produce more biofuel because whatever you do with your soil will not be able to outweigh what you get out of the benefit of biofuels. So I think it depends on the problem, and I think with this tool you can solve any problem as long as you can formulate it into a really good question. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Trung.
Thank you.
So committee will take a few minutes off, and we'll get the room reconfigured, and then if I have any volunteers that want to help and move tables, that would be
See,
great.
Keith, I gotta go. We'll be back.
These ones, yeah, we have, the table comes in pieces. You see. We got it. A second? Yeah, these guys are the close. Good job, man. You really,
Yeah, thanks for
That's really good.
advising me.
Yeah.
Your advice. I took
I
it.
forgot that you were on
Make it a
the
little simpler.
yeah, no, it was, I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, how are you doing?